A longer version of our programme can be obtained on VHS cassette from the British Deaf Association, 38 Victoria Place, Carlisle, Cumbria, CA1 1HU. Price £10 for members, £15 for non-members. And a longer version, back to this afternoon, and at 35 minutes, there's Western Adventure with Bonanza, followed by Cartoon Fun with Tom and Jerry at 10 to 2. The omnibus edition of EastEnders takes us up to 3 o'clock, and our afternoon film, which stars Bob Hope and James Cagney in The Seven Little Boys. Dave Lee Travis presents the Golden Oldie Picture Show at 4:30, and David Attenborough explores the frozen world in The Living Planet at 5 to 5. Finally, at 10 to 6, we join Jim and Carol in the Beechgrove Festival Garden, and that's the afternoon ahead here on BBC One Scotland. Before all that, we join Ross Muir at the Royal Highland Show at Ingliston for our weekly look at the world of farming in Landwood.
Welcome to Landwood, which today comes from the Royal Highland Show, opened there in spectacular fashion once again by the Red Arrows. Over the next half hour or so, we'll be bringing you some of the highlights of what has become Scotland's main farm and country event.
And nowhere has that tradition been more firmly established than here in the livestock lines, where I'll be discovering who's won the top prizes for producing the best livestock in the country.
And I'll be reporting from the other end of the show field, where the agricultural machinery manufacturers are attempting to sell Scottish farmers equipment and machinery which will enable them to produce more and more, while at the same time the government is preparing to pay farmers to produce less and less.
And this year's Royal Highland was truly a royal occasion, with Princess Alexandra and her husband, the Honourable Angus Ogilvy, spending almost 6 hours touring Ingliston on the opening day. For the Princess, it was a 4th visit to the show. She was a guest in 1961, a year after the Royal Highland put down permanent roots at Ingliston, and again in 1974 and 1980. During this year's royal tour, the Princess saw the main highlights of the show and took in some of the livestock judging, including the Jacob Sheep Championship, which was won by a flock from Ayrshire. As patron of the Breed Society, the Princess showed obvious interest and enjoyment in a breed of sheep that has become a popular feature of the show. The livestock tradition of the Royal Highland is for many the main feature of the show, with the parade of prize cattle one of its great spectacles. But it was excitement of a different kind that the Sunday crowds had come to see.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
The Australian touring axemen were demonstrating their skills in the sport of wood chopping, an activity at which the Australians have been unbeaten champions for over a century, with 24-year-old Bruce Winkle giving an awesome display of power with the axe. And if that looked strenuous enough, there was even more of the axeman's skill and strength to come.
But for many, it was business as usual in the livestock lines, as once again the pride and joy of sheep and cattle breeders were brought out to compete for Royal Highland honours. This is one of the most traditional areas of the show, where little has changed for decades, except the familiar British breeds are now joined by European invaders. Months of preparation, feeding, leading and grooming is all targeted towards a nail-biting few minutes in the ring. The sheep section had record entries, almost 1,100, and is now one of the largest competitive displays of sheep in the UK. And with over 350 dairy cows and more than 600 beef cattle, there was hot competition and livestock enthusiasts had plenty to see. But over by the goat classes, there was more to learn than the name of the prize winners. The show was chosen to announce a significant boost to the commercial production of cashmere by British goat farmers in a rare joint agricultural venture between Britain and the Soviet Union.
Well, we are bringing in Scotland embryos of cashmere-type goats from Siberia, where we collected them last winter, frozen in liquid nitrogen, transported here, and now we are waiting for a suitable time of the year when we'll transplant them. Half of the embryos goes to Scottish Cashmere Producers Association, which has already developed a breeding program for cashmere goats, and the other half will go, and the future supplies will go to any interested parties among Scottish farmers who would be planning their cashmere goat breeding.
Why not bring in the live animals themselves? Because that would be much quicker than bringing in the embryos.
We originally wanted to. This was our plan about a year ago, but an embryo is just the answer, because embryo is a marvelous little organism. It's terribly resistant to diseases, doesn't transmit very many diseases which go with live animals. And another advantage is that for a herd of goats you have to hire a jumbo, whereas if you transport a considerable number of embryos, there are new storage tanks for liquid nitrogen which can take 700 embryos at a go, and 2 people carrying it. So there we are. That's the advantage of it.
The Highland Show encompasses much more than the very best in livestock. It's an important showcase for machinery manufacturers who each year crowd their stands with the latest developments. Gone are the days when selling new tractors and equipment was an easy business. Each new purchase must be thoroughly justified against a background of static grain prices and a relentless squeeze on margins. Co-responsibility levies have yet to make an impression on the EEC's grain mountains, despite a growing political resolve to limit the cost of the CAP. This year at the show, it's the government set-aside scheme, by which farmers will be paid to leave land fallow, that's the principal topic of conversation. Just how importantly do the government view this scheme in the context of curtailing cereal production?
I think it's a very important part of the overall scene. Of course, the easiest way is to deal with the situation by price cutting, so that the right price is paid for the right article. But in the case of the problems that have faced particularly Scottish farmers in cereals, there has to be some way of helping those farmers if they decide that it's a better option to go for taking some of their land out of cereal production. And that is why the scheme that we have produced has been brought in now.
What do you think the public reaction will be to the government paying farmers to produce nothing?
Well, of course, the public have to realize that farmers have done a tremendous lot for the United Kingdom economy over the years. They were asked to produce as much food, as you know, during the war, post-war, and right up to very recently. Now, of course, we've got into a situation, they've done it so well, as indeed have some of their colleagues in other countries, that there is overproduction. I think they have to realize that the land is a national asset, and how one deals with the land has to be the work of the farmers. This government certainly will not let the farmers down in that respect.
There's no compulsion to take land out of production, and each farmer will have to weigh up the implications for his particular business to see whether this new initiative is worth pursuing. So just what do the men on the ground think, and how does it relate to their circumstances?
Not interested at the levels that are offered and the constraints offered along with it at the moment.
So you think £200 a hectare isn't nearly enough?
not for me in my position, with the amount of capital involved and the amount of money we have put into this project. In the years when we were told to grow more, we now have to look at this in a light of covering at least the fixed costs, and this doesn't come halfway towards that.
Now, Jim, you've improved your farm a great deal over the last few years, done a lot of drainage and reclamation, expanded your cereal acreage. How do you feel about the set-aside then?
I agree with Francis 100%, Dan. The levels being offered are very disappointing, and under the present scheme there's no way that we'll be taking it up. I was especially disappointed with the levels being offered for LFA land at less than lowland. Surely this is the very land that should have been taken out of production. We were encouraged in the late 70s, early 80s under various government schemes, FHDS, etc., to increase production, improve our land, grow cereals. We are now geared up for that, and we can't stop.
So you feel hard done by, in fact?
I do. Indeed.
And how do you think the general public will react to farmers getting paid to produce nothing on their land?
I don't think the general public will like it, Dan, but I see no alternative to it. We have to have people living in the country. They have to be supported one way or another.
That's a very important point. The people who live in the country are the people who look after the country. If we're going to make it an area that is set aside and with no one there and poppies growing as some of us would like, I think it'll be a worse countryside in a very short time than ever it was because of what was done before.
Increasingly, the Royal Highland is becoming a platform for companies and organisations launching new products, making public announcements or airing their grievances. And this year the show was used to launch a campaign to fight research cuts which the Institution of Professional Civil Servants claim will take £60 million out of Britain's agricultural research budget. That's the figure they claim has been recommended by the Barnes Report, an internal government study into research priorities for the future.
Well, if that's right, I mean, we could be talking to up to 3,000 redundancies throughout the country, and certainly that's going to have a serious effect on the science that's carried out and the advice and backup that agriculture is going to get.
The government, of course, dispute the figure that you claim is 60 million.
Well, that's fair enough. I heard Lord Sanderson say that this morning. That £60 million is the figure that the Treasury wants to cut off last year. Now, they didn't get that last year. They only got 15 million. But our fear is that the Treasury is very, very persistent, and they'll push that. Now, if the Minister says that's not true, why doesn't he actually say what is true? What is the figure that's going to be cut off agricultural R&D?
But despite what the figure is, the government are also arguing that it's not necessarily a cut, that the money could be found from private sources to fund research.
Yes, that's true as well. Now, the £15 million that they've already cut off the budget was supposed to be filled by private industry funding. Now, if they're going to do that, well, fair enough, but let's do it properly. Now, the way they seem to be going is that they're going to cut this money off over a 2-year period, and if industry picks up the tab, then fair enough. If they don't, the research will stop. Now, our argument is, if you're going to fund it by industry, let's consult with industry, let's find proper ways of securing the funding for research, because it's a long-term prospect, and do it properly. But the way they're going at the moment, it's almost it's certain that there's just going to be the cuts.
So research workers are concerned for their future. They want the farming industry to unite in a campaign against what's described as government attacks. But the government defends its position.
Yes, I've heard these figures mentioned. I have to say they're utter rubbish, and I don't know where they came from. All I would say to you, in the general context, that it is the government's intention, particularly with near-market research, and that definition is quite difficult when you come down to it to define what actually near-market is. It is the intention that more money from the industry will go into near-market research. That having been said, there will be an announcement very shortly on this subject, and consultations will take place, so nothing immediate is going to happen. But I do discount these figures utterly.
Do you not fear that any cutbacks in research might have an effect on the whole rural economy of Scotland?
Well, of course, it depends what you mean by cutbacks. I don't believe in cutbacks. What we're talking about is to try and have as much research directed in the right place by the government. Certain things, the government has to provide the cash, and I might say an incredible amount of cash for research in agriculture and agriculture-related scene. But what I would say to you is, I'm not talking about cuts. I want to see more money going into research. all that I have to say to you is that more money from the industry and related industries, food industries, should be going into this area.
Meanwhile, back in the judging rings, the recent North American influence in the Aberdeen Angus breed was reflected in the choice of judge, Aberdeenshire-born David Slay, now farming in Ontario. And that influence came through in the final outcome, with the championship going to a bull with strong Canadian bloodlines. And there was more transatlantic involvement in a neighbouring ring where Craig Connell, also from Ontario, was judging the British Holsteins. Previous owner of the Wicketthorn herd of Holsteins in Dumfriesshire, Craig Connell emigrated to Canada a few years ago, and 3 years ago he and his family were the subject of a special landward documentary on his new farming and domestic lifestyle on the other side of the Atlantic. After placing almost 40 Holsteins, we asked Craig Connell what changes he'd seen in the British dairy industry since he last milked cows in Scotland.
It seems like in a healthier state. It's a year or two ago since I was over, and it seems in a healthier state now than it was then. The quotas seem to be in place, and everybody's accepting and learning how to work with them.
How does it compare, do you think, with the Canadian dairy industry?
It's similar. The Canadian dairy industry went into a real slump 3-4 years ago when the world surpluses were building. They increased their export levy and cut their quotas in one thing and another. But in the last year, they've since cut the export levies and give us back the quota they took away. So it's the same way. It's in a healthy state now.
Now, you've been judging cattle, obviously. How does the British Holstein compare with the Holsteins over in Canada?
The top end of the classes here today, they wouldn't disgrace themselves in the shows in Canada. The cow we had champion today is really what Holsteins are all about. A good, big, deep-ribbed, good-uddered, good-legged cow.
So in your opinion, the breed's going the right way?
Oh, yes, I think so. I think so. I hope they don't do as is happening in Canada in places, is chasing the index side of it too much, and they're going to end up with the cattle too frail, like what's happening now. I've got into that myself, and I'm not entirely sure that's correct.
How do you overcome that?
I think we've got to breed a little bit more for strength and breed for this older cow a little more. At home ourselves, we're into the second generation high index in cattle. The heifers that's calving now, they're milking very well, they're nice looking heifers, but they just don't have the constitution to make good old cows, like some of the cows we had here today.
The Royal Highland is often described as one of the more colourful events on the summer calendar, and the one feature above all that fits that description is the flower show, with exhibits ranging from alpines to zinnias, from tiny bonsai to specimen trees.
Well, tucked away in the corner of the showground is the crafts fair, and although it's only in its second year, it's proving very popular indeed. And one of the highlights this year is Barnes Toys, and it's a toy store where all the toys have been made by a Berwickshire farmer, Robert Fleming. Robert, where did you get the idea from to make these toys?
Last year we came to Highland Show. I have a young son, he's only 3 now, and we were looking for toys for Andrew. And my wife and I hunted the whole of the Highland Show for toys, wooden toys. We couldn't find wooden toys anywhere.
This is a magnificent truck here, and it's got a price tag of £85. So how long did it actually take you to make this?
It takes roughly about 30 to 35 hours to make that. It's a lot of work to rub the wood down. We buy the wood in just a plank. So it's just raw cut straight from the sawmill. We've only got a bandsaw and a circular sander, and it takes a lot of hand rubbing to get it down smooth, and to cut out all the windows and the doors and things, and just to cut out everything generally and get everything all to match up. And
Now this one has caught my eye, particularly with the extending crane here. So how long would it take to make that?
again, about 15, 16 hours, because it is very intricate to make. You know, small pieces to work with. And again, quite a lot of rubbing down, and the wood that we buy in is inch thick, so therefore it's got to be cut down to that size.
Now this one's actually costing £35, and you're spending about 16 hours on it. That's only just over £2 an hour. Do you think that's a fair return?
No, not really, but you've got to compete with the market that's the plastic market, so.
Now I'm sure every livestock farmer's son would want one of these, so how long does that take to make?
About 25 hours, 24, 25 hours.
Well, where does all the time go there?
And making of the cattle, the stock size themselves. The wagon is relatively easy made, but the size take a lot of working down and rubbing down and cutting and getting to square up and make up. You know, it takes a lot of work, yes.
It's not always the big names in the machinery world who develop new ideas. One Borders farmer has, for the second time in less than 10 years, come up with a simple idea that's won him a silver medal and which looks like catching on with livestock farmers.
Initially, I had a problem with sheep who were escaping without permission, and so I developed this quick method of assembling a wire on a dike, and with the facility of being able to put an electrical charge through the wire to prevent the sheep from damaging the wall.
So tell me, how does it work then?
Well, the basic features of this idea is that you take an insulator, which I have in my hand here, and place it through a convenient gap in the wall, and then lock in the insulator with the clamps provided in the pack, and then locate the wire on the end of the insulator.
So it's pretty simple then.
Oh, it's a very simple idea.
And who's it going to appeal to? What sort of farmers?
Well, this idea should appeal to stock farmers particularly, and those with livestock which can damage walls.
Meanwhile, back in the livestock rings, the week's competitions were coming to a climax with the judging of the Interbreed Championship. The Queen's Cup is the top trophy in the livestock classes and is awarded to the supreme animal in a different section each year. This year, the beef cattle champions from 15 breeds, along with the commercial champion, competed for this coveted piece of silverware. The man with the job of choosing the winners was Perthshire farmer Bill Bruce, the pioneer breeder of the modern beef shorthorn, as well as having the honour of being the first man to export a British-bred Charolais bull back to France, the breed's homeland. The winner was the Charolais champion Fleet's Vibrant, over 1.5 tons of bull, owned jointly by Mrs. Patricia Ogden of Lancashire and Shamley Farms of Surrey. Vibrant had also been the top beef animal here last year. The Charolais group of 4 had also won the Team Interbreed Award, beating the Limousin Quartet into second position. The Romagnola champion, Sterling Jinan, was the reserve individual. This young cow, owned by George McElraith of Ayr, has won the Romagnola Breed Championship here for the last 2 years. Over in the dairy ring, the top beauties from the 4 dairy breeds were coming under the scrutiny of the interbreed judge, John Moffat, a dairy farmer in his own right in Northumberland, and chairman of the company which had set up Britain's first embryo transfer herd. He breeds black and white cows himself, but he fell for the Ayrshire champion, Killock Punch the 331st, from Alexander Woodburn and Sons of Ayrshire. This third calver had never been to the Highland before, so it was pretty good going for a first attempt. Homeland Ruby the 90th, from Henry Bell of Lancashire, the Holstein Friesian champion, would have started clear favourite for this competition, having won several major shows, including the Dairy Interbreed here last year, but this year she had to be content with reserve. The sheep section boasted the largest number of livestock, and there were 18 pure breeds out for the interbreed championship. The continental breeds are fighting hard to make inroads into the expanding British sheep industry, and even some of the most traditional sheep farmers were here to have a look at what the 5 foreign breeds on show had to offer. The judge, Joe Rain, who farms in the Pennine foothills of Cumbria, has been a sheepman all his life. He's a staunch supporter of the blue-faced Leicesters. However, he put breed loyalty aside and chose as his champion a 5-year-old Suffolk ewe from James Wallace's Grey Hill flock at Stranraer. This ewe had won the female Suffolk Championship here last year and had found time to produce triplets before coming back to take this year's very highest sheep award. A true Scottish breed, the North Country Cheviot, was picked as reserve, a shearling ewe which earlier in the week had won the breed championship for well-known breeder Tommy Dunn of Heriot, Midlothian.
For those not so familiar with the art of sheep shearing, a special demonstration displayed some of the traditional skills practiced by the shearer, including hand shearing and shearing on a stool which helped keep the fleece clean. A good shearer using hand shears could take the fleece off 100 sheep a day, but early hand-powered machine shears introduced at the turn of the century soon speeded up the process, with those primitive machines being the forerunners to today's high-tech equipment. For most of the Royal Highland crowds, a demonstration much appreciated, but for some young spectators, the heat and the pace of the shearing centre were just a little too much. And with that demonstration of shearing, we end this special edition of Landward from the Royal Highland Show. Like most Highland shows, it's had its share of success and failures, but for this young chap, it's been a highly successful event. For in a midnight deal, he was sold for a belted Galloway breed record price of £5,000. And later this year, he'll be starting a new life on the other side of the Atlantic in Vermont, USA. So from Volbeck Dunn Controller and all of us at the Royal Highland, it's goodbye.